So welcome to the International Cpted Association webinar on all issues related to crime prevention through environmental design. The International Cpted Association, the ICA, is a worldwide nonprofit association for professionals, researchers, urban designers, crime prevention practitioners, and students of Cpted. Our webinar is intended to educate and extend the Cpted message into topics far and wide. We organized today's special webinar titled Exclusion versus Inclusion. In Cpted, everyone has a role. In response to recent criticisms that Cpted is exclusionary and that it targets minority groups. Today, we would like to dispel these myths with a line of experienced panelists who will discuss where Cpted practice has derailed from the ideas first put forward by Cpted pioneers and why Cpted is in fact the perfect tool for inclusive safety planning and civic participation. Our panelists will also aim to provide some recommendations for moving forward. My name is Matea Mihnyac, and I am an executive director of the ICA. It is my pleasure to welcome and introduce to you today's panelists, Dr. Macarena Rao, the ICA president from Santiago, Chile, Gregory Seville, ICA inaugural president and co-founder from Colorado, USA, Barry Davidson, ICA treasurer and co-founder from Canada, Pamela Daniels, community relations specialist from New Jersey, and Harry Tapia, a community developer for a nonprofit in Philadelphia. Welcome everyone, and I would like to hand over to Greg Seville, who will also moderate today's webinar. Welcome everyone.
Welcome as well from here in Denver, Colorado. Hello everybody, thank you for coming today, and good morning or good evening depending on where you are in the world. So first of all, to the panelists, I want to thank everybody for coming. They volunteered their time to come today. We're all very passionate about this topic of exclusion and crime prevention through environmental design, or as we all know it, Cpted. And they've all volunteered their time to do the practice sessions and prepare for today's session. We have all kinds of questions that have been sent ahead of time. We have questions that we're getting online through the chat. If you get a question, put it in the chat. We'll address it as we can. But we have a whack of other questions that we've already received that we want to get to today. So my background is I'm an urban planner from Canada originally. I'm a criminologist. I'm a former police officer. I've been one of the co-founders of the International Cpted Association with Barry Davidson, who's one of our speakers here today. And I guess the best way to describe this is a number of social media links I've had in the last number of months talking about Cpted and the role of Cpted and some of the criticisms of Cpted. And so we're going to get around to that today. But I think before we get started, it's important to describe a couple of points, get a couple of questions out of the way to start with. The one is I've made a couple of notes here, just thinking this through over the last couple of weeks. One is, what is exclusion? And I guess the issue of exclusion is one group, usually a minority, being excluded from participating in public life in some way, shape, or form. In this case, due to planning, design, or architecture. And the question comes up is, are all spaces open? And the answer is no. There are private spaces which aren't open, they're private. And the increasing issue of privatization of public space is an issue that's important, but it's beyond the mandate of what we're going to talk about today, but it is part of the story. But in the last number of years, there's been a movement to talk about the kinds of architecture called defensive architecture or hostile architecture that exclude certain groups from public spaces. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. And the question we're answering is, does Cpted play a role in that? To get started, and I'm going to have to ask the panelists to address this, my initial discussion is that the initial Cpted, early Cpted, first generation Cpted, does that initially through access controls and through natural surveillance to try to protect vulnerable people from offenders offending with impunity. And so that was the initial theory and intention. Barry's going to talk a bit about this in his section next. Barry Davidson, one of the other co-founders of the International Cpted Association. And I guess the question we have to ask is, should the public be protected from criminal behavior? And I think the answer is yes. But the question really for this webinar is, how should that happen if we exclude non-criminal people from places? So that's kind of where we're headed today, is talking about those general issues. So having set the stage a bit about what exclusion is, I'm going to turn my time over now to Barry, and he's going to talk a bit more about Cpted and the ICA. Barry, over to you. You're mute, Barry. Continue mute on, please. Thank you.
There we go. already technical issues. I want to thank everyone for coming out, and thank you, Greg. I'm actually quite excited about this webinar because what I hope is that it opens a can of worms for many discussions down the road, because there isn't enough time to get into everything that the situation we're in has opened or cracked open. I'm not going to bore most people with the hardline history of Cpted and such. I just want to hit some key points and help build an underlying foundation for the discussion around that inclusion, exclusion, and whether Cpted, we have one question that's come in, is Cpted racist? And we're going to deal with that. I think it's important to recognize that the roots of Cpted were not aimed at the built environment, which we turned to. We looked at those strategies as influencers and strategies that we can apply. When we go back to Jane Jacobs' work, all the way through to C. Ray coining the term, up to Oscar Newman's work, we recognize that human connectivity, that human element, is what was driving and paving the path to the solutions. And Cpted has always been aimed at crime reduction and inclusion. And to Greg's point, I think part of our problem is we're having to step around that definition of inclusion and really self-examine where we as a society, certainly in North America, are at around that point. The process and the purpose that the ICA came together, and when Greg and I and several of our colleagues put this together, was around the fear we had that in today's society, as we tend to try to simplify for the sake of delivery at so many levels, we were concerned that we were going to lose the actual direction and impetus and value that Cpted brings to the table. And that's why we're here today talking about that. We are looking at that entire environment, and through the ICA, we've created a framework that we hope is being applied and should be applied more around ethical responsibility and the appropriate level of training to develop those plans and processes utilizing Cpted strategies and such. Also, very important to recognize that Cpted itself is known by many, many labels, right? We have Safe Growth Now, which is allowing us to actually speak to the core meanings and direction of Cpted. We have had other labels that have damaged us along the way over the last many, many years. We have had an over-application, if you will, or development of situational crime prevention, which in some training programs I've seen has been an underpinning for what they think is Cpted, and we know that that's not correct. So I think it's important for anybody working within this realm and looking at or studying Cpted to make sure they understand where it actually came from, and then look at that path to where we are. Don't look for the easy solutions, because you'll hear later how the challenge behind Cpted is that it's never easy and context is everything. And so you need to make sure you're actually collecting the appropriate data from the experts and the people in the community, which are the community, to make sure you're able to apply those strategies. Over to you, Greg.
Okay, thank you, Barry. And so thank you for your opening comments. And I'd like to ask Macarena Rao, the president of the International Cpted Association, to start off with her comments. Maca, over to you.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Barry, and welcome to this nice audience that is hearing to us today. I am Macarena Rao. I am an architect, a doctor in urbanism, and I am very proud and honored to be now the international president of the International Cpted Association. For me, Cpted is a big family, and also the ICA. I was trained in ICA since year 2000, when we start transferring the Cpted methodology from the Toronto city in Canada to the first Latin American city, Santiago de Chile, where I live. And it was very challenging that time because of the problems, the criminogenic problems we had. My region, the Hispanic region, unfortunately, is the most criminogenic region in the world. And we face not only common crimes, we face organized crime, we face violence, and it's very difficult. And because of that, we discovered that Cpted, and mostly Cpted second generation, was very, very inclusive. It was the tool and the methodology that we need to include and involve those communities that were very, very vulnerable for crime. So my perception is that Cpted, well applied as methodology that considers the native wisdom of our neighbors in the streets, it's a very, very inclusive methodology. And this is our evidence the past 20 years here in the Hispanic region. Back to you, Greg.
Okay, thank you, Maca. Welcome from Latin America. Welcome to the discussion. Next on our list, one of the other panelists and speakers is Pamela from New Jersey. Pamela, why don't you say hello to our audience?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone around the world. It's very exciting to join this team and to present today. I'm Pamela Daniels. I am a community organizer by training, and I also serve in various capacities as a consultant in the area of public relations and business development. I've led a community development agency that has done community development in neighborhood-based community development, and I was actually trained in the Cpted methodology, Safe Growth Cpted methodology in 2016. That was my first time hearing about it. And it really provided a blueprint for organizers here in the Newark, New Jersey area. I'm from Newark. We have a pretty colorful history and reputation, but I feel a little bit better now that Macarena has shared her side of things. But really, that training allowed us to dive into a specific neighborhood that, on the outside looking in, it was beautiful, but there were a lot of challenges that the neighbors there were facing on the ground. And because of the organized process that Safe Growth enabled, starting from making sure we had a truly representative team that included police officers, that also included people from the neighborhood, we really got to drill down and identify some of the challenges that were being faced, and then start to, in a very logical and authentic way, start to address some of the low-hanging fruit. There are still some larger challenges that, of course, larger resources are needed to provide some of those bigger long-term solutions, but it really allowed us to begin from the point of social cohesion, which is just allowing us to have conversations with folks and not just feel like we're coming in to take over, or not feeling like that we're just trying to check off a box, but really dig in there and become part of a community to resolve the issues that they're facing. So I'm really encouraged and excited to hear about some of the challenges that others are facing, and learning how having a person on the ground like a community organizer can really help you hear what's being said by the folks in the community, and to start to design some long-term solutions.
Thank you, Pamela. Appreciate your comments to start with. And the last panelist on our list is Harry Tapia from Philadelphia. Harry, welcome, and please say hello.
Perfect. Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Harry Tapia. I am a developer by trade. I am located in North Philadelphia. I work at ASE. We're a nonprofit that's been working there since 1982. And my role primarily is to develop low-income and senior housing. And of course, Cpted plays a big role in how we develop here in North Philadelphia, being that, we are dealing with a lot of crime issues, from the opiate epidemic to the current social injustice riots that are happening, in our country and in America. And then, of course, the latest one, which was Walter Wallace, which, again, really affected our community, although that killing happened in West Philly, which is, sort of pretty far away from where we concentrate in North Philadelphia. We experience a lot of looting and, a lot of violence, in response to that unjust killing. So, hello from North Philadelphia. Again, really glad to be here and, to experience this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry, and welcome again welcome to our Philadelphia friends. You've been doing some great work there, and we're going to hear about it over the next hour and a half. So before we get to the first question, we picked one question that we've got already that we wanted to have everybody comment on because it's really interesting. What the first question really talks about is the fact that this isn't just an American issue, although we've been framing it from the point of view of what's going on in America right now with all the turbulence. But it really isn't. It really is the issue of exclusion and inclusion has been along in urban planning and urban development for forever. And I guess, Matej, before you put that up, I just wonder if you could just take it off for a second here. I just wanted to talk a bit about something else here. And that was that I think what we need to acknowledge is that we're talking about all groups in public life, all minority groups, whether they're in any dominant culture. In Budapest, Hungary last year, I was brought to one ethnic neighborhood of the Roma people, the so-called Gypsy people, who are a minority group in many European cities. I was in Sweden not long after that, and I learned about ethnic immigrant peoples immigrating from the Middle East, who were speaking up in Sweden about issues there. Many years ago, I was invited to Japan to talk about some of the issues of crime there, and I was brought to some Korean communities, and the police were talking about those issues and so forth. Of course, we have Aboriginal issues in Canada, places like Canada and Australia. Years ago, I visited a community in Sydney, Australia called Redfern, which had these issues, and I've lived in Canada, so I've worked in places like the downtown east side of Vancouver and in places like Winnipeg. And of course, Macarena Rao will talk to you about these similar minority issues in Latin America. But today, the issue that we hear about in the news is from the United States. That's ground zero of what we've been talking about. And a lot of it's come as a result of police shootings of Black people, most on our Black people, the Black Lives Matter movement. And this has led to calls by urban designers. And this was one question that came up is, why are we talking about this? Who's saying these things? And there's been a lot of going on, actually. There's been university classes in Cpted that have been canceled. There's been planners in Vancouver, Canada, who are trying to take the Cpted regulations or proposing to take the Cpted regulations out of the prevention strategies in the city of Vancouver. If you follow online, the planning literature online or the planning blogs online, the planner Jen Robertson, who wrote in Spacing magazine in July 18th of 2016, this is a number of years ago, she was talking about it back then. And she was concerned about the quote that she used was, mainstream public planning has not considered the needs of vulnerable people. Instead of it's actively planned against people in public spaces. And her concern was this concept called spatial anti-blackness, which just has been emerging in the last number of years. And most recently, urbanist Alan Brucknell on the Harvard University Graduate School planning site wrote an article called Design as Protest, How Can Designers Stand For, Fight For, and Build an Anti-Racist Future? And on that website, Alice uses the quote, ways that white America has militarized architecture and design reinforce its white supremacist ideologies and its anti-Black violence in the built landscape of its cities and neighborhoods. And then June of this year, Brian Lee Jr. in the Bloomberg News in the City Lab website, if you follow that, it writes an article called America's Cities Were Designed to Oppress. So there's been a lot of literature and a lot of writing about this issue lately, and we felt it was important that Cpted, and particularly the ICA as the global sort of voice for professional Cpted practice, have a response and talk about this. So having said that and set the stage, we talked about this ahead of time, and we agreed that there was one question we thought we'd all answer. Matej, if I could get you to put that up on the screen, please. And it's interesting because the question comes out of South Africa, a country that I've spent some time in, and I love South Africa. And the question reads as follows: I'm from South Africa, and the layout of suburbs favored the minority under apartheid, such as location of government facilities and hospitals, police stations, etc. Although the current government is moving toward correcting this imbalance, it is still suicidal to build new facilities in previously disadvantaged areas without high security fences, 24/7 security guards, and armed responses. How would you propose Cpted principles could be implemented in this instance? So that's the question. Matej, we could just go to the faces, please. And let's just go around the panel and ask the panel, what do you think about that? Let me start with Maka.
Hi, Greg. Thank you. It's a very interesting question. Regarding developing countries context, the context where I most apply my research and my work as Cpted practitioner, it's a very good question, because what we discovered the past 20 years applying Cpted here is that we need to have super clear two main points. Cpted is all about context, and it's all about process. Cpted, it's not a 1 day or 1 week task, because you get very involved with communities. And sometimes when the levels of violence and crimes are so risky, so high, you need to understand that you cannot take out fences or walls at the beginning. It must be a process with the municipality, with the community leaders. Then you need to negotiate peace. Then you need to make sure that if you will take out the fence, you need to offer something that is in the public space that is very attractive to increase natural surveillance, for example. And also it is all about context, because what I most love about Cpted is that you may know very well the community where you are applying the strategy, and each community is different. One community in some part of the city is completely different to the other community, and when you understand that, the deep spirit of the community, it's much easier to get with the correct response using the Cpted methodology.
Okay, thank you. Now let's hear from Pamela. Pamela, what are your thoughts on this question?
Hi. I think it's very important to remember an organizing principle, which is you have to meet people where they are. And so if it's important to, in a particular neighborhood, to have that level of hardened security, then you must have it, because you won't have, people will not themselves feel comfortable to move in or have that particular development there. So as Maka mentioned, you have to set a goal. You have to set a goal of where you would like to go with changing the dynamics, but you can't just end up at that point at the beginning. So it's very important for you to meet folks where they are, and having that sense of understanding from the community members that this is an element that is still very important to them. You cannot dismiss that sentiment.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And Barry, what are your thoughts?
I love being on a panel with so many smart people, because I don't have to, they help me with all the answers. I guess I'm going to aim a little bit higher, and I agree with everything I've heard, so I'm going to try to sound intelligent through this. That when I read the question, one of the things that it hit home again, and it has been my mantra in training and consulting forever, and my starting point, is that humans are complex. And if we're dealing with social issues, crime or otherwise, the solution to that is likely going to be complex. And if you're not willing to step into, and when we look specifically at Cpted approach and methodology, it's absolutely critical that the local experts are leading, guiding, and in most cases owning the solution, and sometimes even defining that solution. It's all well and good for us as consultants to come in, whatever our background is, and say, we're here to fix your problem, but it's the problem we defined in our head. And we often don't start early enough. And the other point I wanted to hit on, and Maka said it so well, is that local engagement is critical, but it has to be long-term. We have to move past the hole that we've fallen into, especially around Cpted training, often within law enforcement, where we're creating checklist approaches. We come into your neighborhood, we do a community safety audit walkabout with our clipboard, and we've solved it. That actually probably creates more problems, in my opinion. So we need to make sure that part of that approach, and goes back to the roots of Cpted, are around a long-term strategy that is, I'm going to say, more than informed by the local community and the people in that space, so that they own the solution and own the plan.
Okay, now before I go to Harry, Barry, because you and I are old friends, I feel inclined to give you a bit of hassle here, play devil's advocate for a bit here. You make the comment about long-term, which is important, of course, but to the Cpted person in the audience, to the crime prevention person in the audience, who is going into a high crime area and has the mandate to do something about it right now, and may not have the mandate to do anything about it long-term, how do they deal with it? What do they do as a practitioner right now today that to protect the residents of this housing complex without putting up the gates? Or how do they somehow magically devise a long-term plan? Where does that come from?
I appreciate the question, Greg, because it allows us to put some wheels on what feels a little esoteric. It means, and it is an absolute imperative for that crime prevention practitioner stepping in to recognize that whatever they do, whatever strategy and application they're putting in place can't be owned by them. So literally in their mind, on their task list, the first thing they need to be doing is identifying those community leaders and community influencers who are either already committed or need to be engaged and committed, so that when that practitioner is not there, that plan has some future to it. And a lot of Cpted, in my experience, a lot of Cpted consulting with communities around the engagement side has been focused on, we focus a great deal on building out the capacity of those community leaders to carry this work forward. So we're teaching them how to plan further. They don't need us at the table to continue developing and adapting that plan forward.
But it certainly changes the role of the crime prevention consultant or the crime prevention police officer who goes to a shopping mall and is tasked with doing a Cpted security audit and checking off some sheets and then giving that to the property owner and saying, here's what you need to do, and then going to the next call. Those days are gone. Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying. And in this realm, I feel sorry for our people in uniform that are tasked with doing this, because they are tasked with doing it. And it's a bit of a no-win situation because they probably don't have the appropriate training. I don't want to shoot too hard at some of our training programs out there, but they don't know what the actual goal, and they're hiding it under the label of Cpted, which has brought us to this conversation. And in a lot of cases, and if we think back to the good police officers, community workers, social workers that have succeeded in creating change in their areas of work, they're often people, and I actually even just think of principals in schools, they're people that people look back on at the change they created in the people around them to empower those positive developments moving forward, and it wasn't about them. And the problem is for our police officers in uniform, they're tasked with going in to fix a problem. You know, we have this challenge that, here, go do a Cpted audit and we'll fix the crime that's happening in that mall. Yeah. And their leadership is entirely at fault for even putting that kind of responsibility on them. And then they're usually the ones that are hearing it from their own supervisors when that checklist didn't suddenly reduce the gang crime in that mall.
Yeah, which spills over from the violence and the Black Lives Matter movement into the regular policing services or other kinds of policing services, and leads to this animosity between the community and the police. And now the cops are in a no-win situation. You know, and
the good cops, the frustration that good cops out there feel is immense, and there's not a win to that. I mean, no. I'm the wrong demographic to be trying to defend that side. But I know an awful lot of good cops out there that are good cops and are trying to change the world. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then Harry, you live in a community that's had issues, and you've been doing amazing work there in Philadelphia, and you've also worked with the police there. How do you answer this, both the South African question and also some of the points that Bear and I were just talking about? Please, over to you.
Yeah, I think I want to echo, my colleagues in saying that community involvement is very big in before implementing any Cpted principles. And then one thing is, at least, in our community, is that based on, the times and what kind of crime you're trying to, reduce, it's going to change, right? You have to evolve because, like in North Philadelphia, we had the crack epidemic. And so Fenton worked, right? Keeping folks out and making sure that we keep crime, such as we did with our Conrail line, which was an embankment, and we had a ton of crime that was being committed there. So Fenton worked. However, switching over now to the opiate epidemic that we're facing, there is no fencing, right? Because folks are just, living on the streets, having open air drug markets. And so, we're a bit puzzled on what, Cpted principle we use, because, they shoot drugs, sell drugs in front of the cameras, and they don't seem to work. So, yes, again, as Barry, mentioned, is very complex. And then one of the other things is that it evolves, like, again, in the 80s, we faced drug dealing with fencing and cameras. Now in the opiate epidemic, those two things, we can't use them. So, we have to really rely more on working with the public officials and working with the administration to not just put up additional cameras, but also work on the social service aspect of it. So it'll evolve, it'll change, but again, as my panelists here stated, it really starts with community engagement, because those are the boots on the ground, and they're the ones that let you know what Cpted principle would work. And again, it'll change, because crime is it'll change over whatever pandemic we're facing, or crime wave.
Yeah, we have a pandemic question a bit later on. We're going to get to as we get into this a bit later on, and we've already done webinars with the IC on COVID and Cpted, but we'll touch on it a bit later on. But that's a really great point you make about the 80s and how the drug situation has changed. In the Cpted movement, there was a movement in the 1980s and 90s in Cpted to focus on the physical place, to the exclusion of a lot of social conditions. And there are styles of Cpted that are still taught in Cpted classes today, like the broken window theory out of New York by George Kelly and Wilson, which is not Cpted. It never was Cpted. And I've never understood the connection there. I mean, I know George Kelly before he passed. He was an amazing scholar. He did some tremendous work, but he never meant for it to go that way. That was never his intention. And it was never a Cpted strategy. So why Cpted practitioners keep bringing in the broken windows theory is a mystery to me. And same thing with a lot of the academics who are talking about focusing on place and crime hotspots and the geography of crime. I'm a geographer in the background. I have a lot of sympathy to that approach. But when they talk about using situational crime prevention and incorporating that into Cpted, as though that's Cpted, it's not Cpted. I mean, Cpted fits under situational prevention, but it is not a Cpted strategy. And by focusing on place to the exclusion of people, you end up with these unintended consequences of excluding people from public areas. And that's never going to help. The cameras, and you just said, Harry, the cameras and the fences of the 1980s aren't working today. It's a different environment. It's a different world. And you, Harry, your group in with the housing you do and the development work, you've actually come up with another strategy in Safe Growth Cpted, which is called the Livability Academy, where you actually teach residents to do it on their own neighborhoods. Could you talk a bit about the Livability Academy?
Certainly. So at ASE, right, we approach our work through neighborhood plans. Every 10 years, we develop a new 10-year neighborhood plan. And of course, one of the major things that came out of that neighborhood plan was crime. That was our major issue. So what did we do? Of course, we hired a criminologist, so Greg Seville. We hired him, came out, actually did a crime study, and really focused on what is the crime that was affecting our area. Out of that, there was a suggestion to, create the Livability Academy. So, with my colleagues, we created this 8-week course where, we train residents in planning, in Cpted, in zoning, in fundraising, and really give them the tools for them to select the project that, of their choice, to identify a specific problem, whether it's, crime, or whether it's food access, whatever problem, they, see that is the most impacting, their quality of life. So after the 8 weeks, we continue, and actually we do have some seed money to actually make that project become a reality. So they don't just go to training and then sort of, don't put those skills to use. Right away, they put those skills to use. And so we've had about 6 livability academies now. And what we created is we have the special groups. So right now, I'm working on an open space. And so we've hired, or given stipend to about 8 community residents that are working directly with us on safety and, and Cpted, and how we develop that open space. And again, they're working directly with the developer, which, I'm the lead developer for that open space, the architects that are designing that space to make sure that we're addressing all of the safety needs, but again, hearing it from the residents and having them, be a steward of that space to make sure that once we develop it, they're going to, make it their own and make sure that it's safe.
And you also you'd actually teach the residents themselves Cpted. So they learn how to they go out, they do Cpted surveys themselves. And they have police officers from the Philadelphia Police who actually participate when the academy and participate as well. So it's a collaborative bottom-up approach.
That's correct. Yeah. And it's multi-generational. So, we have, high school kids, we have senior citizens, and we also, again, we try to expose them to as many professionals as possible, right? That's really how, to tackle a problem, right? To look at your asset map and really get, in touch with folks that bring resources. So one of the days is once they come up with, a project, they have to write it up as a grant. And basically what we bring in is, partners. So we'll bring the city of Philadelphia, we'll bring in Shift Capital, which is another investor here, other nonprofits, and basically they present their grant to each individual partner that's there and try to recruit them in order to make that project bigger and, and a success. Before, of course, the final day, which is their graduation, and then they, present their project, to the community as a whole.
Yeah, and could you imagine the activists who are talking about removing Cpted from the story? Could you imagine removing Cpted from the story you're telling there? Cpted is an amazingly powerful tool for community empowerment.
Oh yeah, definitely. As long as it's used, respectfully to the community that you're trying to put, implemented in. But for us, in order to keep our residents safe, it's probably our go-to tool.
Right.
As we start planning, and it doesn't matter what architectural firm we bring in. Right. That's the first thing I let them know. It's like, hey, we practice Cpted here, and you must incorporate this into the drawings.
The answer is so simple. It's right in front of us. It's not the problem is not with Cpted. It's the method by which it's delivered. Now there's a couple of questions before we get to the prepared questions. A couple of questions relating to these points that we're talking about with Harry and Barry. From Elizabeth in Saskatoon and also from Simon in Nigeria, who asked about this. Before we get to those questions, Matea, I saw you popped in there for a minute. Did you want to address that other question, that other point somebody asks about how do they access the other webinars from the ICA?
Yeah, I have already responded to that question. So yeah, that's taken care of. But I wanted to actually jump in to refer to Elizabeth's question, because it sounds like what you're saying, this discussion, Harry and Greg, that you were just having, including the community, seems like a perfect response to some of the often knee-jerk reactions about putting more cameras and putting more police, right? And often that's what people, the residents of certain neighborhood, that's what they know, and that's what they're gonna propose because they feel like that's gonna make them feel safe, right? But do you have any strategies about how we can actually get people, to join those kind of discussions and Livability Academy in the first place? Because I often hear, in different communities around the world, and I've worked on 3 continents, they often say like, we can't get them to come to us. And I know we've been talking about coming to them. How? What are some of the maybe, more specific strategies that can assist us? What are some tools that we can use maybe that might be interesting to discuss?
Sure. So in other words, how do we engage the residents when they're not used to it or they don't want to is one question. That sounds like a Pamela question to me. And before we get to Pamela, I also want to cover the other aspect of Elizabeth's question and also Simon's is, but how do you deal related to police conducting Cpted, but not being given the power to do it properly? How do you deal with this when a community or the majority of a community calls for more police? The community sees the answer, like they're confused over the ends over the means. They think the way to get to the end is by having more cops, when in fact, sometimes it isn't. And so the question is, what does the policy person say to the residents about this when they just want more cops? Barry, you want to try that?
Yeah. And I don't mean to, this is going to land squarely in Pamela's realm. I'm not sure I would say I'm good at it, but I've spent a great deal of my time in communities recognizing that we're facilitators stepping in. And the answer is actually in the last sentence of Elizabeth's question is how do we guide them based on the issue that brought us in front of them to the actual problem. Because if we take away, and I'm thinking of several communities I've worked within where they have crime and social disorder issues. So they just want someone to fix it because they're now so frustrated, and at the end of their rope, they're looking for that quick fix.
Right.
So to me, and it's not an easy path, this comes down to that facilitator person in front of them, helping them understand how the problems got to where they're at, and how they can be empowered as the community with the supports of social services, policing agencies, whatever, but supports, not direct guidance, if you will, or driving from them. And how are they empowered to learn how to best address that, which speaks to that becoming a longer term and more sustainable solution usually.
Which gets back to this whole issue of engagement. I think it taps into Simon's question from Nigeria. Simon, I hope I'm interpreting your question correctly, but you ask, our group in Nigeria needs headquarters assistance. I'm assuming authorities, municipalities, or police. Our group in Nigeria needs headquarters assistance in completing the process of affiliation. So they need help in doing that. Engagement's a big deal. Pamela, any thoughts?
Absolutely. So a lot of times you have to figure out what are folks' motivations to get them motivated and empowered. And that can take on many forms. Some folks want to be a voice for their community. And so by providing them an opportunity just to be trained in a certain, like whether they're trained in Cpted or they're trained in how to be a facilitator, just being able to provide those kind of resources helps to elevate their voice, and they are a natural leader and are able to bring additional people with them. Other folks need a little more coddling or need a little more pushing. And so their motivation may not be that immediate big problem, but if you're committing to, as Barry mentioned, a long-term solution, they just want to be more active in the community. And one of the things that we've did when we were trying to create a resurgence of just general involvement through our neighborhood planning process, and after we did surveys and find out what kinds of things people wanted to see in their community, the one thing that rose to the top was community gardens. And so by having a program that centered community gardens, we got a lot of people out the house, on the ground, in the community, and through just the time that they were spending in the gardens, they were able to hear about some of the other opportunities, those capacity building programs and so on, and they signed up for that. So, as was mentioned, it's not just about just saying, okay, by next week we're going to have this solution and we're going to have a group of people who are going to be willing to participate. It's committing to a process that enables people multiple ways to contribute, whether they are contributing in that survey or they're hosting a focus group, because they have a space that you can go and bring a group of people to contribute to a plan. You just have to commit to identifying several avenues for folks to take to begin the process of becoming an elevated voice. And that is truly what empowerment is.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a good point, because a lot of times when I listen to the criticisms of Cpted, and you're hearing these articles and these discussions about exclusion, and Cpted is defending people, the white people against the black people, or the poor people against the rich people. I mean, I have seen that happen. I have seen homeless situations. For example, I recall stories in London, UK, where the shopping stores were trying to put these spikes near the window so homeless people couldn't sit down, and things like that, and the root of the problem is a homeless issue. It's not putting spikes there to displace them into the next shop's front window. It's dealing with the issue. And the shop owners say, yeah, but that's not my job. My job is to run a store. And so it's kind of like, when the police go to the surveys, they're saying, it's not my job to change society. It's somebody else's job. And what I'm hearing you're saying, Pamela, is really, instead of removing Cpted out of the strategies, we should be doing the exact opposite. We should be increasing it, making it part of the planning process, and expanding it down to the community level, not just keeping it off for the specialists, but making that strategy for everybody. Am I getting that right?
Absolutely. So, and I know everyone's infrastructure in their community is different, in their neighborhoods are different. We have a large network of block associations, and there are anchor institutions, nonprofits that support the development of new block associations. And so, one of the things that those block associations tend to do is to have, neighborhood, neighbors that come together and participate in various trainings. So being able to do that, to have a Cpted training at the neighborhood level, at the block level, is transformative because they are now involved in a principle, in a planning principle that is normally at the practitioner level, but it's then brought to the resident level. And I think being able to provide those kinds of supports will enable you to push the needle so much further.
And what Harry talked about in Philadelphia is the training isn't just for the residents who come out, maybe for stipends, maybe voluntarily, but it's also for the shop owners, it's for the other residents, and it's for the police. They train together. It's not like the police come as the authority figure to give advice, because the police often don't even get training in Cpted in the police academies. They get basic, marching skills, shooting skills, and law skills and arrest skills. None of the crime prevention stuff that we're talking about here today. That needs to be part of the academy training. And I always insist when we do our training that we have a group that's representative of the whole community, including the police, working from the ground up. So, that's such a key issue here. I do want to move on to some of the prepared questions because there's all kinds of them we haven't even touched them yet. We're dealing with the audience questions. And by the way, if you're in the audience, please do ask questions, put them in the chats. If you want to jump in and contradict anything we say, please do that. And to my fellow panelists, do the same as well. We're all friends here, so. And I'm seeing the one of the questions on the list here. It's actually, I'm going to address it to Maka because I've been watching you there. And there's two questions: is how do we design and plan inclusive places? And I'm going to merge it with the second question, which is Cpted racist? And we're kind of talking about that now. So could you talk a bit about, as an architect, could you talk a bit about how do we actually design inclusive places in Cpted to make sure it's not racist? Maka, over to you.
Thank you, Greg. Well, it's a very good question. And I want to connect that question also with the previous one, how we engage a community. Because when we make a very inclusive strategy, it's the strategy that can touch the hearts of the community. The first thing that we need to do to tune with the community's spirit is to understand the pain of the community. We need to understand how they suffer, how they are hopeless, for example. Many communities all around the world, they are tireless. They don't want more empty promises from the authorities. They are waiting for many years to have better conditions, to have sport facilities, and they never get that promises constructed. So we need to understand, and we need to humanize the application of Cpted. The first thing that we need to practice is empathy. When we understand the suffer of another human being, then we will be very connected with that person. And this is the first thing we need to do as Cpted practitioners. Then we need to start working together. And then we can start a healing process, a community healing process that will take time, probably. When communities are very damaged and very vulnerable, of course, they are very afraid, they are very angry. We need to understand them. Then later, we can start changing the environment together with the police forces. And in that sense, your question is very good, Greg, because of course, a proper design can be very inclusive when we understand the pain, the suffering, and then together, all together, we can look in a Cpted process for the correct solution. And the correct solution is not the one-day solution, as I said before. It's a very long-term process. In very vulnerable areas, young people, children, needs to be monitored, for example, in a very lovely way. Since they are in schools, they go through the higher school, and they can later go to study a career, for example. What's happened if an authority or a program of crime prevention only applies some support when they are children, and then they get no more support, what will happen? We will lose these children. So it is very relevant to have long-term process, so we can go hand by hand with the community in an evolving process. And of course, with that idea, we will ensure that safety issues are very sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, I often see these criticisms by some planning activists about Cpted and about exclusionary design, saying that the response needs to be in the hands of planners who now have to change policies, change the way they do planning. And my feeling is, especially what you're saying with the children, is there's many stakeholders who play a role in safety and crime prevention. Schools are one of the most important. And when schools are running classes inside the classroom behind closed doors with boards and computers, they're not working in the community. I mean, there should be some way to engage the residents in community life, so that when they go to the next grade and they move up and they get older, they know people, they know how to deal with people. That sort of linkage is part of the story. And I think that's absolutely true. And I think planners need to stop thinking just about the planning side of it, the land use side of it, and the economic development side of it, and instead to start to think about, how do I link that together? I'm not criticizing planners here. Planners do their best and they do marvelous things, but there are times when they look at transportation or economic development in a very sophisticated way, but then look at urban safety from the narrow lens of the cops do it or the cameras do it and so forth. They need to be much more sophisticated in how we collaborate in the schools. I mean, I think that's what you're saying too, isn't it, Maka?
Yes, completely agree, Greg. And we have many activities and initiatives that involve children. We consider that children's opinions is so relevant. We need children's opinions and inputs and bright ideas to change environment. We need all community ideas. Brainstorming workshops and very creative thinking is very needed. And of course, we need to work with the police hand by hand.
Yeah. And before, I want to go to our prepared questions, but we're getting such great questions in the chats. I don't want to ignore them. So I'm just seeing here that before we get to the next prepared question, I see Craig has asked a question that says, in some neighborhoods that are very transient, it is tough to know who will be owning the plan going forward, because there's so many people moving in and moving out, particularly in some of the resource communities in North America, up in North Dakota, up in northern Saskatchewan, northern Alberta, and many other neighborhoods within large cities. Neighborhoods aren't stable. They don't have people live there a long time. And if that's the case, then how do you get ownership? How do you get people to take ownership if they're not even there? Barry, you want to take a shot at that?
Sure, and I'm going to lean back a little bit to what Pamela said earlier around meet people where they're at. I think part of the problem that we've had in trying to address perceived and real rips in the social fabric of communities is that the people that are tasked with fixing those don't take the time to have an understanding of the community. And I mean, when you have areas that have a lot of, that are transient in nature or high rental or whatever the case may be, that's the community, and us trying to jam a round peg into a square hole is never going to fix that. So I think it comes down to, it's more work, it's more complex, it's more challenging, but it comes down to finding what the carrots are to engage those people and redefining what owner. We keep saying we want somebody to own the plan. All we really need to be doing is connecting with the right people in the community. And my team spends a lot of time determining who that is, because it's not usually the loudest voices, and making sure that we have an understanding and we've learned from them what it is they want to solve. And I mean, I guess, and I'll be a bit of a pessimist, whether they want to solve it. I mean, I've been in a few communities where there's a perception of issues, and once we get brought in and lean into the community, the issue we're brought in on is a long ways away from what's on everybody's mind and keeping people up at night.
Yeah, and my view of the story is that Cpted's more than simply learning about urban design and urban affairs. It's also about working with neighborhood participation. It's learning the skills of neighborhood activation. It's learning the skills of group dynamics. Exactly. And Pamela, I want to bring you in here because you have lots of experience in this area.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I want to say if you're getting that level of feedback and divergent thoughts of what should go into a community, that's a great thing. Okay, so the fact that you have differences of opinions, but you're collecting this information from the community is awesome. Like, you're on the right track. And to what Greg just mentioned about group dynamics, is making sure that as you're coming in, whether you are the anchoring institution, so a nonprofit that may own, and the nonprofit owns the process, they don't own the plan. The plan itself is going to be owned by the community. And so, but you have to have someone who's going to facilitate and someone who's going to be the institution that can help to bring in the resources to enact the plan. But when you are facilitating this information, folks want to know that what they've contributed, that it was put into this process, and that it has a location. And at the end of the day, it really, what you end up doing sometimes, because you prioritize what your actual recommendations are on whether it's something you can do now, if this is something that's simple or maybe requires more support. You don't know what you can do first, second, third. Really depends on what resources you have. And sometimes the perfect grant just comes along to make the graffiti project happen, but not necessarily, the other project. And so, but both are in the plan as goals. And a lot of times it really rises up to saying that we want to have 5 recommendations. And based on the surveys, or based on the focus groups, or based on, the manner in which you've collected this information, these were the top 5 or 7 recommendations that you're going to go with. Right. And here are all the other things that happen. And you may have another partner that says, well, these were the things that were in your parking lot, but we can make this happen. And so you bring that back to the community. So, and so when we say, this is about a plan and a process and a plan, all of that is meat for that plan. And again, if you're collecting all of the various feedback from members of the community, you really are ahead of the game, because a lot of times it's hard to even get, depending on your community dynamics, it's hard to get a diverse thought. Some people they stop at, well, we just don't want crime.
Right.
You're like, well, what do you want? What do you want to say?
Right,
exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's interesting though, but in some ways, to the regular or the traditional Cpted practitioner who get a training course and they think they get participation, they think they get the social stuff in there, because if you read some of the early Tim Crow, which is an early planning Cpted book from the 80s or from the 90s, or if you read some of Oscar Newman, his Defensible Space book, and even some of the later books on urban safety, urban geography, urban crime, you read a little bit of this stuff, but you don't read enough to really become masterful at it. And you're at a disadvantage, Pamela, because you learned Cpted through the safe growth method, which is heavily invested in second generation Cpted, in which case we do actually teach participation. We do teach engagement as part of the roots training. Before you even get to Cpted, you learn this stuff first. Most training in this country doesn't do that. Most training in this country, I say this country being the US, and unfortunately it's also the case in Canada, at least in a couple of the provinces in Canada, very heavily based in 1970s, 1980s, 1990s Cpted, which is physical opportunity reduction first. What do you say to those practitioners? Pamela?
Well, so I believe that you really can't have progress without folks on the ground, and it really comes down to putting together a team. And so you have to take the same way you look at your physical assets and all the things in the community as a whole. What does your team look like? What does the team asset look like? What are the skill sets that are there? What are the skill sets that are still needed? What are the audiences that each member can speak to and relate to? And so, and for as an organizer, as a community organizer, that's really the most important. That who am I working with? And realizing that everyone has something to contribute. Not everyone is going to be eloquent. You mentioned, the loudest voices in the room. How do you extract what that loud voice said or what that angry person said to really get to the core of right. Which is a jewel? There's something in there that's a jewel. And how do you develop the art, of doing that? Yeah. So So I think that I don't really know how y'all did it before, but how we're doing it now, and it really comes down to that having a grassroots appreciation that there's going to be folks who can speak to their neighbors, who can speak to the community, and as well as speak to the police and speak to the government officials, and bring it all together so that everyone is speaking the same language.
Well, the answer to how y'all did it before is, unfortunately, how many Cpted practitioners are still doing it now. That's what's led to some of these criticisms. And my answer to that, if I could just jump in as a panelist now and say, my answer to that is the same as the answer I would provide to the South Africa question that we started this webinar with, which is, I've been to South Africa a number of times. I love it there. I love the people. I love the country. And yet it's a country deeply rooted in racist policy called apartheid. And they've had that for years and years, decades and decades and decades. They're living the consequences of that legal policy now. And many folks in the US say the same thing about slavery in this country, that we're still living the consequences of that today. All right, so that being the case, then the question arises, yeah, but I live in my housing complex right now, I get burglarized, does that mean I can't put a fence up to prevent it? Which is what the person from South Africa is asking. Or somebody in central LA asking the same thing, or in Philadelphia where Harry works, or anywhere. And my answer to that question is this, that yes, you may need to protect your community. Yes, you may need to use access controls. Yes, you might. There may be a role for cameras. There may be a role for lights. But the problem is not that stuff. The problem is stopping there. The problem is not having a plan to go to the next level. The problem is doing it by yourself or with an expert who tells you what to do, hands you a report with 25 recommendations, then walks away. That's the problem. It's the process of the problem. If you don't involve the community with a collaborative approach that comes up with a long-term plan that says, yes, maybe we're going to have the gates in now, but in 5 years, our plan is to take them down and do this. Or in 10 years, our plan is to redevelop this area. What they're doing in Harry's neighborhood in Philadelphia, which is they have these 10-year plans. Harry, talk about your 10-year plan process, because that's a great example of how you get around this stuff.
Yeah, so before I talk about our neighborhood planning process, I'll touch on a little bit, regarding, what happens when, you do have a transient neighborhood. So again, I think it goes back to inclusion, right? So the way that, as a developer, I look at my community, which involves residents, which again, they need to be the driving force, but it also involves small business owners that don't live in the neighborhood. It also involves police officers that patrol our neighborhood. It also involves the council person who, prepares policy. So when we set up our Livability Academy, I want a group of folks that represent all those individual groups. Yeah. So if you have transient residents, at least you have, residents and stakeholders that can continue to carry your plan if you have residents that pop in and out. So you have to be, inclusion is very, very key. Our neighborhood plan, the way that we approach our neighborhood plan, it's really through stakeholders and a very big partnership with our community residents. Right. So what we do is we select individual addresses to make sure that we survey. So for our latest neighborhood plan, we ran about 400 surveys. The neighborhood plan that we designed is for the Fair Hill neighborhood. And to give context to what the neighborhood looks like, it's 1 square mile. We have 20,000 residents, very highly populated. So we go out, we conduct resident surveys. What we do is we shut down our company completely. We have 40 employees. So we make our employees actually go out and do the surveying. We don't hire 2 consultants to do all the surveying and then come back and give us, a report. Like, no, as a company, we need to go out there so that we understand the folks that we're serving. The added layer to that is a stakeholder committee. So we do have police officers. We do have the councilwoman. We do have small business owners. We do have police officers, firemen that are part of that stakeholder committee that we use, and we fuse that with the residents. So we're one big committee that's working on identifying the issues for that 10-year neighborhood plan. What we do is we break it out into 3 phases, sort of like, the 1 to 3 year, 3 to 6, and then, 6 to 10. And then for the latest one that we specifically did, as I mentioned, we bring in a special criminologist because that was the main issue. So we bring Greg in as a consultant, so that we can identify the issues and then really, as part of the plan. And one of the greatest meetings that I think I've been involved, Greg was a part of, where we had this open town hall, and we had pretty much a bunch of residents, a bunch of the religious groups, council people, where we had over 80 people participate in the process of going through what are the issues, to make sure that we are putting strategies in to solve them.
Yeah, exactly. And without getting into self-promotion here, because I was part of that project and I'm passionate about that approach to this, there are going to be many folks on this webinar who aren't, that's fairly advanced. What you're doing there is probably the most advanced in the country right now. And most folks aren't going to be there. They're not going to have those things in place. They're not going to be there. Jeremy asked a question earlier about this, saying that one of the, he said, one of the arguments against natural surveillance in defensible space is it gives, in communities of color, is it gives law enforcement the advantage of control management and actions versus providing self-enforcement of the community. Can the panel address this conundrum? In other words, the cops are doing it and therefore the residents are not doing it. I mean, I think we've been talking about that anyway. And my feeling is the answer to that is you do have this collaborative process in place that Cpted's not done to or for, it's done with. Pamela, do you want to jump into that?
Yeah, I agree. I think the point we're trying to drive home is that we're using a different lens, and that community engagement. And someone mentioned, starting with a community agreement. And I agree, Jeremy. Is that we're first and foremost, we're committing to doing things differently, right? We're all coming to the table, whether we're doing this because we're addressing a specific issue in one small area, or we have a whole neighborhood, a collection of areas that we're trying to transform through a 10-year plan. We want to address this in a different way. And so Cpted is a process that allows us to address those, because when you're doing a neighborhood plan and you're trying to transform, the first thing that folks are going to say is, well, we want to address crime. But that's such a broad topic and a broad challenge, then it could mean different things in different corners of your community, that Cpted allows you to methodically come up with, okay, what do we mean when we say crime? But that's just the starting point. And so when you're putting together, Harry called it a stakeholder team, we call it a steering committee, where you're putting together that steering committee, you're saying we're trying to address this problem, not only address this problem, but implement these solutions. And that whole process is likely going to take you no less than a year. And so whereas the Cpted piece may be a 2-month, I would say a 2-month process to get you started, the rest of it, is going to take you about up to a year, and sometimes longer. I mean, my first neighborhood plan that I did took us 3 years to get the 5-year plan down. And that's why I think funders finally got it in their heads to say, okay, we need to see a 10-year plan, because it's sometimes, and look how much we just paused this year. All your plans that you put in place for this year, everything got paused, right? So if you were in the middle of a planning process, that 1 year just immediately became 2 years. So having the police at the table is not only to quote unquote address the crime, but it's for the police to be part of this long-term solution that the various stakeholders, the residents, the government, the police, the funders, whomever is at your table, must commit to that.
Yeah, and so we don't want the police to be doing Cpted surveys to us. We want them at the table, so we're doing it together. That's the essential message there, I think is the answer to this. And so we got to get out of this business of everything being done to us as the residents, everything done for us as the residents. We've got to get into the position where we're working with. I want to bring Jeremy Rear in. Jeremy is architect from Portland, Oregon, which has had all kinds of issues, I'm sure if you followed the news, related to unrest and protests and Black Lives Matter and so forth. And Jeremy was the one who asked the question about that national surveillance business. Jeremy, you want to pipe in here? Because I think you have an interesting perspective, please.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. This is Jeremy Rear. I think that the question came from Brian Lee Jr.'s point in the designers protest about the different issues with Cpted in communities. And I think one of the arguments was Cpted providing a way to naturally surveil the environment, it being to the advantage of law enforcement. I think that the stigmatism, or the stigma here, is that it's not about the law enforcement having the ability to do this. It's about the community, and I think that's where the message kind of gets off course. It's really about community empowerment, not giving law enforcement that advantage. So I think I just wanted to make sure that there's this understanding that it's, again, like you're saying, it's about the community, community empowerment, community engagement, community being able to take back the self-enforcement rather than relying on active law enforcement.
Yeah. Maka, why don't you jump in there, Maka, and I'm going to ask Barry as well.
Yes, I agree so much with Pamela's description and experience with Harris and also Jeremy. Jeremy, you're completely right. The idea is to put the light, to have a very clear focus on what we are spreading here. The idea is to empower the community. When the community is enough empowered, as you said, Jeremy, of course, natural surveillance will be a very positive principle applied because it will be part of the process of the community empower. So the idea is to have it very clear from the beginning. We need also to be very connected with the authorities. What is best in our experience is when, for example, the mayor also is part of the community empower process. Yeah. Of course, the mayor, the deputies, the police force, it will be a much better process. So I completely agree with Jeremy, and I'm very happy that you jump in. And
just to expand on that, Maka, so what you're saying then, if I'm getting what you're saying is right, is we need to light up the engagement process. We don't just need to light up the street.
Completely, both. Yeah. Sometimes also it is very needed to apply the proper lighting, but it will be a result of a proper process. Right. I think the first step is to ensure a very healthy and very happy social architecture. I am an architect, but I believe that before to do the physical architecture, we need to ensure the social architecture.
Yeah. Yeah, because architects, I do a lot of training in academics, architecture planning schools, and the first thing that young designers want to do is they want to design themselves out of every problem without considering the context of the social environment first. So
yeah, completely agree. But then we realize when we are working in the field that what really matters is to have a very healthy community, to empower them, and then of course we will decide the best design options. But the first step is to have a very healthy community and very cohesive community.
And sometimes you don't have that. Sometimes you're there because it's not cohesive, because it has gangs running the show, and the gangs want to control territory. But that's what Randy Atlas calls offensible space. They control it for the wrong reasons, not the right reasons. So.
And Barry, as Barry said, sorry, Barry, but you said crime problems are very complex problem, but also human being is a very complex phenomena. So as you said, Barry, that's true.
Let me bring Barry in. Barry?
Yeah, and I mean, so much wisdom here. I just want to hit 2 points that come out of this for me. And Maka made the one there, is that we need to recognize and park egos along the way if we're stepping in to any community to help, because that's what we're trying to do, is that everything you have there starts as a human problem. Everything else contributes to that human problem. So when we look at this, when we are trying to engage the community, one of the problems with engagement, and Jeremy's point really hits this home, is when we talk about natural surveillance, for me, because I am privileged enough not to have had or experienced the direct issues that many other people in our world have, I don't have an immediate mistrust or distrust of police or the agencies. However, how do you engage and empower if the trust is so badly broken? And I say that as a bit of a rhetorical question, which points back around, and in my professional career has always been the driver of how important that engagement and data gathering kind of makes it feel a little too sterile, but learning about what it is you're actually trying to help them solve. And without it, I mean, we keep calling Cpted a tool. In my mind, Cpted is a toolkit because you're never going to use the same tool twice. And you really need to make sure you're reaching for the right tools. And the only way you do that, and Pamela said it, and I love her timelines, it's tough to get funding for projects that way, but the fact that if I can't go spend a couple of months minimum in a community that I'm about to step into, then I'm ill-equipped to be any kind of a guide with where they need to go.
Right. Well, and not only that, but you know, I feel sympathy right now for the practitioners who's on the street, the consultant, the prevention, you know, a specialist, the police officer who's trying to do this, trying to do good things. I mean, they're not going out there to make it worse; they're going out there to make it better. And they're asking right now, at this point in the webinar, they're going, "What do I do? Tell me what to do. What do I do next?" I mean, these are great concepts. They're very esoteric. They're very theoretical. I agree with all that. But tomorrow I have to go down to the high crime housing complex. I have to do something. What do I do? That's what they're asking. And my answer to that is, what you do is you stop thinking about yourself as the expert and you start thinking of yourself as an educator. You're the person who's
put the checklist away and pick up the notepad.
Exactly. Throw the checklist away, pick up a notepad, get down there and to teach them what the checklist looks like, teach the rest, so you're working together. I mean, that's my answer to a lot of this stuff, which, by the way, is also why we have the International Cpted Association certification process, because we want to make sure that people who get certified know how to do this, because a lot of people who show up at your door aren't certified and you don't know what you're getting. Matea, did you want to expand on that one point you were making in the chat section there?
Yeah, it's a question from YouTube, and I'm hoping I understand it correctly, but I think it kind of speaks to the point that we need to have various stakeholders that are basically relevant to the area that we're addressing, you know, where we're addressing the issues, either it's a neighborhood or some more micro spatial location. I think it's important to have these different stakeholders at the same table, because often we come to the question, it's like, whose perspective are we looking at? Because I think the question here is Cpted considered racist by the rich or the poor communities? It depends, you know, first who's probably the implementer, who's the instigator, and on the other hand, for whom it was actually implemented, like who actually gets benefits out of it, I guess. That's why I think it shouldn't be one side or the other, but a collaborative approach to ensure that there is no exclusion, right?
Yeah.
So, so I think this is something maybe that we can touch upon, because even Jeremy's question was about, you know, perception of natural surveillance as the ability to supervise the disadvantaged communities. Whereas, you know, if communities do it and they're part of the process, they actually use it to their benefit to be able to feel safer and to be able to, you know, also be safer. And so it sounds like the question is also who is actually the person who benefits from it.
Yeah,
so
for my answer, I'll answer it, then I'll open it to the panel. My answer is this: I think there's some fundamental mistakes being made with the assumptions in that approach. Errors, fundamental errors. Error number one is the questionnaire is assuming that Cpted is the root of the problem or the trigger to the problem. Cpted is not a trigger to any problem. Cpted applied improperly is. You know, an aspirin can solve a headache and resolve pain, but if you take too many, they give you ulcers. So the problem isn't the aspirin, it's how it's applied. So that's a fundamental mistake error to start with. Another error is they assume Cpted is still rooted in the 1970s. We didn't know a lot of stuff 50 years ago. We know a lot more now. Cpted is got to be engagement, participatory oriented. That's why we created second generation Cpted. That's why we have an international Cpted certification program to do that. They also assume, the third error I think is they assume that Cpted is a police program. It's not a police program, and the police departments that are practicing it need to get out of the business of doing that and need to get into the business of educating that. And I think the sooner we do that, the better. And the planners who are sitting talking about removing Cpted from their planning programs, I think you need to do the exact opposite. You need to expand it, but you need to expand it down to the community level. So that's my thoughts. Anybody on the panel want to type in there?
Yeah, I'll like to jump in real quick. So yeah, I've been waiting to answer that question, whether Cpted is racist, and I think I go back to what Barry said. It is a tool, right? And if used, incorrectly, it could be racist, right? So, and I'll give an example of that. Again, I come from a developer background, and we develop low-income and senior housing. We purchased a development from a for-profit developer in the early 2000s. They implemented Cpted, right? So they had cameras, of course, they had access control. But what they did was they also implemented that to the rental office. So not only did you need a key in order to get into the building, which yes, it's good to make sure that you keep people who don't live there out. But what they did was they applied that same sense to the office. They had rolled down gates. You couldn't see people. So it was a way to keep the residents out and keep the residents from, working directly with the property managers. So in that sense, it's a full profit developer. And to the extent that they're using roll down gates and making that low income housing project look like a prison, then in that sense that, they use the tool in a racist way, because they would not develop that way in center city or in the suburbs. So it depends, how it's used, and so, yes, it could be used as a racist tool, but not, it doesn't always have to be. Again, it goes back to what Craig says is, if used correctly, right, and then, it's used responsibly, we still use all of those same Cpted principles in the way that we develop low-income housing. However, access control is to keep people that don't live in that facility out. Our offices, the libraries are all very open, a lot of glass to make sure that as residents see, they have that connection with the property management to make sure that, they're a team, right? Because the property manager is an extension of the residents.
Yeah, because access control, national surveillance, territory, the first generation concepts still have a powerful role to play. The question is how they're put in place. So I think you're right.
And if I could just jump in, it goes back to the team on the ground, right? Whether or not they've taken the temperature of the community to see that these things are of value. And it goes back to your assumptions. Are you assuming that that all these gates have to be down, or is there a consensus that we're trying to get to the point where we don't need gates? If that is the goal, then at what point in our 10-year plan are we going to try and make sure that we remove all of the gates? Or are you coming in and presenting this plan that says, hey, I've got these gorgeous new gates, okay? And here they are. And, these are the most modern ones possible. They connect to your surveillance system. You're like, but dude, we don't want gates. So you have to check your assumptions from the beginning.
Well, and not only that, but I hear these, I do work a lot with police departments, and they're very proud of these new technologies, these predictive policing models that get the cops to go somewhere, or these shot spotter audio devices that locate when gunshots are shot. And my whole thing was, that's all great, but wouldn't it be great to be there before they start shooting? Wouldn't it be great to actually prevent? I mean, it's called crime prevention, not crime response through environmental design. So we got our priorities and our assumptions are totally backwards. I'm noticing the time here, folks, to be moderator. I'm trying to be mindful. We've got so many great chat questions, and we've only got about 5 of the prepared questions. I want to end with at least one more before we turn it over to Maka. And it says, how do we this is, I can't see who this is from, but it says, how do we combat complaints from the business and the community who say that those who are okay, so I think what they're asking here is, when they have people who are harassing and loitering and causing disturbance, and say they're homeless, for example, as a business person, what am I going to do now? Okay, I don't have time to set up a process. What process could I possibly do? And that's there's another question here about, can Cpted define space as being cared for and protected by public use when there are disruptive and unsafe environments? What does the person do? Maka, you want to try that?
Yeah, no problem. It's a very good question also. And we had experience past year here in Chile. We had the social unrest movement. It was a very big movement in the country with much damage. Of course, the society was very angry because the inequality of the country for many, many years. But nevertheless, we had violence, riot. It was very complex for more than 3 months. So we had that situation with, for example, the owners of little shops in different towns of the city, and they asked us what to do with that. And of course, the idea is, first of all, you can have a very clear design. You can have a target hardening design, as we suggested in some cases. So, for example, when you know that you will have social unrest, then you can easily clean what is happening after the protest. But also, this is como to solve the effects of the social unrest. But what we suggest in a more deep sense is to understand the causes. And the causes of the social unrest are very deep in our society. In our case, we try to make better schools program, to have a better crime prevention, drug prevention programs. So the idea is to make changes in public policies, to involve the government, to make much better offers for to solve inequality. So you need to have a short-term activities, but also long-term and very deep activities that really can do a sustainable change in unequal situations.
Yeah, and I see Peter Murray is responding in the chat saying Cpted is not racial, but some people have racial tendencies, and that's true. That's exactly true. And Carlos from Honduras is saying that he's been working in these vulnerable communities for a long, long time, and they need it as much as anybody. They're part of the story. So I don't think we have time to get to the rest of the questions, folks, because we've run out of time. It's gone by so quickly, and I want to be mindful and respectful of your time. Maka, I'll turn it over to you for final words, and then Matea, you can end the webinar. So from me and the panel, everybody, thank you so much. Maka, over to you.
Thank you, Greg. It was an incredible webinar. Thank you so much to Greg, Pamela, Harry, Matea, and Barry for your commitment, for your brilliant ideas, and to the audience for your inputs. Of course, I want to highlight very quick 3 main ideas. The first one is that ICA next year will have 25 years since it was founded. So please trust that we have enough evidence, enough connections, and enough information to share and promote this methodology in a global scale. The second idea is that please know more about our certification and accreditation programs. You can find all the information in our websites, and they are the only formal and truly original certification programs of Cpted. So we will be happy to have you certified. And finally, we are ruled by a very strict code of ethics. All our active members and our board members are ruled by this code of ethics. That is a very complete code of ethics. It's also in our website. And of course, it makes sure that we are very inclusive and not racist. So thank you so much for being here today. And please, I invite you to become an active ICA member. Back to you, Matea.
Thank you very much, Macarena. I want to thank all of our panelists today. Great, interesting discussion. Looks like we're going to need to have part 2 of this discussion. There's already been some requests for that. I do want to thank everyone for emphasizing the importance of professional and ethical Cpted practice. And this is something that we're, as an ICA, we're really endeavoring to promote and to emphasize also as Cpted continues to evolve, and also as more and more practitioners get trained also in some of the regions that are kind of starting to dabble more with Cpted, we're seeing some great development, especially in Asia and Latin America, already has been very active for a few years. So let's continue with that. Before we end, I just want to quickly show you where you can join us if you're not yet a member of the ICA. So Macarena has mentioned that you're able to join us as members. You also have benefits. You can watch all the webinars for free, for example, and you have several other benefits as well. So please join us if you're not yet a member of the ICA. If you're Cpted practitioners, we were talking a lot about certification. So if you want to ensure that your competencies are recognized by a global organization, the ICA, which is the leading Cpted association worldwide, please check our certification program. And if you're a course developer and Cpted instructor, also check our course accreditation program. Then also make sure to follow us on social media to be up to date with what's happening, and contact us if you have any questions or need any information, and we'll do our best to assist you. So I would like to thank our panelists again, and thank you very much also to our viewers. Thanks so much for taking the time to spend it with us. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.